Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Maui, Hawaii, United States of America, here on July 16th, 2016. Good morning to you, or good evening, afternoon, wherever you may be. Today's talk, as I see it, my live stream, my podcast, just came to me just minutes ago. It's how should I say, a carryover, a further development of my talk from yesterday. And the title of it is wow, a tough title, the Genocide of Democracy in Myanmar. The Genocide of Democracy in Myanmar, coupled with a new phrase just came to me, the Dhamma of Sedition. The deliberate incitement of the population to confront, I want to use the word false authority, sedition. The deliberate incitement of the population to challenge and to confront dictatorship, totalitarianism, false authority, the Dhamma of Sedition. And to empower that word sedition, to take it out of the word something negative. And equally, the challenging phrase, the genocide of democracy, which just as of this morning, I was reading the news and meditating and reflecting on the ongoing crisis in our beloved Myanmar with the terrorist organization known by the acronym MASAC, Ming Online, the former senior general of the armed forces, who is now a Bin Laden, Pol Pot figure. He's a rogue, satanic, evil man. And his cult, his terrorist cult, called State Administration Council, better known as a terrorist cult, has descended into what looks like to me a deliberate, unconscious, conscious genocide of the democracy movement in Burma. It's hard to even talk about this crisis at this point. It so boils my soul with Dhamma outrage, political samvega, the heightened urgency to illuminate the wisdom of revolutionary compassion within the world of politics and society and democracy and the quest for human rights in the country of Myanmar, worldwide, and to do everything possible to confront MASAC and to stop his genocide of democracy. Now, allow me to get into this a little bit today. This is an edge. Many of you know, and those of you who don't know, Burma, Myanmar, is in deliberate, full military lockdown on a couple of levels. One, there is a nationwide hunt, a persecution, a rape, a torture, an assassination of anyone involved in Burma's struggle for freedom. Any overt level of support for those who are actively involved in Burma's deep, deep, courageous struggle for democracy, rule of law, unification of all ethnicities, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. Anyone involved in these human vocations of decency within our own cultures of democracy worldwide. There is a violent, torturous, terrorist hunt for these men and women, these boys and girls, children, doctors, nurses, journalists, teachers. And there is indiscriminate murder on the streets, in shops, in hotels, in monasteries, in homes. This is a genocide of democracy and a genocide of the people in the country of Myanmar, embodying the timeless principles of human rights, rule of law, justice, decency. And they are being hunted by Masak. Equal to that, there's a second military lockdown based upon the COVID virus, the Wuhan virus, the China virus, the Xi Jinping virus, the Anthony Fauci virus, call it what you want. The weaponized gain of function COVID-19 virus that is sweeping the world in its variants. It's been now almost 18 months or more. And it has, in recent weeks, swept throughout Asia, India. We all remember and have indelible images placed on what has happened in India with the bioweapon, COVID-19, that was either deliberately or inadvertently released into the world population from the Wuhan biolab in China, funded in large part by Dr. Anthony Fauci and his colleagues, and weaponized through what's known as the gain of function, essentially creating lethality in a virus with the belief that somehow the more lethal it is, we'll have big pharma come in with more potent vaccinations to confront the heightened lethality. However, there is no need for that type of research. It was outlawed by President Obama in 2008, and yet the sociopath Dr. Anthony Fauci took it upon himself to find a place where he could go and deliberately increase the lethality of this virus that's not really in nature at all. And for whatever reason, it was either leaked or deliberately or inadvertently. And now we're dealing with the variants of this bio virus, this lethal biovirus. And in Burma today, in Myanmar, the COVID is sweeping through the nation. Ming Online, the terrorist at large, and his terrorist organization, Masak, has hoarded the oxygen supplies throughout the country. They're shooting people who may line up trying to buy oxygen in various places, killing doctors, nurses, clinicians. It's a genocide of democracy and a genocide of the people based upon an individual, a man, who has lost all reason and conscience. And I think it's high time that the world leaders, United Nations, call Burma what it is. We are undergoing a genocide of democracy in Burma, and the deliberate, satanic, torturous behavior of this man, the terrorist at large, Ming Online, and persecution of the people by forcing them to be sequestered in this COVID lockdown and depriving them of therapeutics, of hospitalization, of clinics, doctors, nurses, and oxygen. This is a genocide, and it should be called as such. I call it the genocide of democracy in Burma. And that's the context that we're dealing in. Now, many of you know, and for those of you who don't know, back in 1989, 1988, the 888 revolution took place a year before China's Tiananmen Square. And at that time, the dictator Ne Win ordered soldiers loyal to the totalitarian evil master to shoot upon sight, bayonet, and to torture, kill, rape, assassinate. A year later, a year and a half later, there was an election in 1990. And not too dissimilar from the recent election here in 2020 in Burma. That many of the elected officials were systematically rounded up, incarcerated, tortured, some killed, some just simply disappeared. Many fled to the outlying areas of the country where I met with the Prime Minister and many of the elected officials in the Karen state in the area of Menaplau. As a result of those several months of being underground, both in the cities in Burma and in the outlying areas in Shan and Karen state, it was asked of me to write about my experience, which I did in a book called Burma, the Next Killing Fields. And it was blessed with a foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. That was in 1990, 31 years ago. I bring this up that Burma, Myanmar, has a long history of radical militarization, desecration of the people, systematic killing of elected civilians. And here we're seeing it again, and yet again, this is not an ethnic cleansing. This is a genocide of democracy in Burma. Okay. How can the world sit by and watch and talk and release press releases? How can the United Nations simply observe and just simply point out crimes against humanity? How can world leaders sleep and dress and eat in decency and conscience without immediate intervention to stop the ongoing genocide of democracy by Ming Online's terrorist group, Ma Sak? Yesterday I spoke about the heroic monk U Ottama. He had met Mahatma Gandhi. You may remember that Mahatma Gandhi came to Burma in 1929, I think. He met with Buddhist monks at the Shwedagon Pagoda. He talked about the power of ahimsa and nonviolence and revolution. And U Ottama had been imprisoned. He was imprisoned again. Why? For speeches, for Dhamma talks, speeches, inciting resistance to the white supremacist occupiers known as the colonial government in Burma at the time. The white supremacist occupiers, the genocidal white supremacist occupiers from England that desecrated, decimated, tortured, assassinated, and tried to kill the will of the people's desire for sovereignty and freedom. And U Ottama, a Buddhist monk, may very well be the instigator, the revolutionary member of the Theravadan Buddhist Sangha to illuminate what became known as the radicalization of Dhamma or engaged Buddhism, more of a revolutionary expression of moral integrity, ethical wisdom, Dhamma intelligence, uottama, radiated the world and his own native country with the wisdom of resistance, the Dhamma of Sedition, inciting the people through his Dhamma talk, through political samvega, a heightened urgency to do not separate consciousness, Dhamma, civilization, democracy, and politics. Freedom is freedom. We have examples. He went to prison. Another monk at the same time, Uwisara. What I'm doing here is I'm looking for evidence historically and trying in my own humble way to find relevance in their own behavior, in their own words, in their own speeches, to incite a radicalization of Dhamma sedition inside Burma, especially within the Sangha, especially within the Nayaka, Mahanayaka Sangha, the most celebrated elder Buddhist monks, bhikkhus in Burma, along with the Tilashans, nuns too. Nearly 500,000 Buddhist monks in Burma. Nearly 500,000 members of Ma Sak's military terrorist group. There's a confrontation of good and evil, right and wrong in that country right now that we have never before seen in recent history, a radicalization that we must draw upon within history, within tradition in Burma, to realize that there is a role, an intrinsic role within the Sangha in Burma to follow in the footsteps of these luminous monks, Uottama and Uwisara. Uwisara. And I put out a call to my friends to find their speeches in Burmese that landed them in prison. I want to see their words. Uwisara was imprisoned several times. If I'm not mistaken, he met with Uottama in 1923. Imagine Uottama and Uwisara, both of whom went to prison numerous times based upon sedition, Dhamma-oriented sedition, encouraging the people of Burma to no longer normalize oppression. I think there's something so radical about that expression of conscience in action. It's so revolutionary. I cannot imagine, it's impossible to imagine, having been a monk in Burma, having been involved as a peripheral member of Burma's struggle for freedom, having interviewed and talked and discussed for many hours and weeks and months and years, frankly, with many of the leading figures, that there is something wrong with Dhamma sedition. Using the power of conscience and dignity and Dhamma and voice and right speech and the eightfold path that includes political samvega, a deep radical urgency, a fiery sense of dignity and conscience where compassion includes all people in your actions, and you include even the evil occupiers. You Commit yourself to Dhamma Sedition. Why is this so difficult to do? Is it an act of cowardice, an unrecognized sense of normalizing evil, translating Dhamma to mean inaction, impotence? Is there a mistaken identity for moha here, and you think it's wisdom, the wisdom of non-participation? The country is going into the darkest era of its long history. Let it be known, Burma today is the genocide of democracy, the genocide of freedom of thought, the genocide of freedom of conscience, the attempt to outlaw the National League for Democracy, the attempt to persecute Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, the state councilor, Nobel Peace Laureate, persecuting the civilian leaders, killing activists, doctors, nurses. It's a genocide of democracy, the embodiment of freedom and revolutionary sedition against false authority. And here I am trying to draw upon history in Burma with U Wisara and U Otama. I was trying to imagine this morning what his speech was, what he said, how he said it, what it was that the white supremacist false occupiers of Burma at the time, how they were provoked, what in them felt threatened. I could imagine right now, say the top 100, the top 500 leading sayadaws in Burma were to go back into the annals of history and look carefully and read the original Burmese words that I know exist of U Otama and U Wisara, those speeches that landed them in prison, and reorient those speeches in your own language, your leading 500 Mahanayaka Sayadaws in Myanmar, and equally the leading 500 Tilashins, 1,000 men and women strong, to incite Dhamma Sedition, encourage the people to resist the evil occupation of Ma Sak. This to me, Dhamma Sedition, is the ethical courage and the Dhamma intelligence coupled with compassion in action and a revolutionary sense of using the power of right speech, right intent, and to use your role as a moral authority in the country of Burma. What other reason do you have to exist than to exercise the necessity of moral integrity and dynamic action that supports the very people in the country that you need to sustain your life, your robes, your medicine, your food, your shelter is inseparable from the will and the good generosity of the people. If the Dhamma means anything, it means Dhamma Sedition, to challenge false authority that desecrates, assassinates, and tortures your dana and your sustainable human base. If the people right now are crying out for leadership, they're crying out for moral wisdom. It's embodied, as I understand it, within the elders of the Sangha. We have examples. U Wisara gave a speech. He didn't incite violence. He used the power of conscience and words in such a way that provoked the false oppressors to then imprison him with the charge of sedition. False authority incarcerating ethical wisdom. That is the issue at hand. Using our ethical, spiritual Dhamma intelligence to support the people at their greatest moment of need, a genocide of democracy. Uwisara was imprisoned, and the white supremacist occupiers forced him to take off his monk's robes, trying to humiliate him. He refused. They stripped him of his robes, forced lay clothes on him. What did he do? A revolutionary act of conscience. He refused to participate in their denigration. He continued his action of Dhamma sedition. He went on a fast. He refused to take food from the evildoers. Right there is the example. I'm inviting the entire Sangha in Burma, bold as this statement is. It seems so clear to me that if U Ottama and Uwisara stood for anything to confront the white occupiers, they refused to take food from the evildoers. The top 100, 500 monks and nuns, 1,000 strong at the top, and 500,000 or more nuns and monks. The invitation here to create the action of Dhamma sedition. Refuse to take food from the evildoers. Let it be known, as they are undergoing a genocide of democracy, let you refuse to participate in those who commit the genocide. Refuse to take food, money, medicines, robes, anything at all from anyone associated with the leading commanders and generals, either in uniform or retired, associated with the terrorist organization MASAC, and the police force at this point, two rogue evil institutions in Myanmar. Refrain from taking food, medicines, money, robes, shelter from any of these evildoers. I think I would go as far as to put up a sign on all yektas, all monasteries throughout the country. We do not accept donations, supplies, food, medicines, any material objects whatsoever from anyone involved, anyone associated with MASAC. Dhamma sedition. The refusal to participate in toxic, poisonous material objects. These are tainted. They're being stolen from the people. Taking them is collusion with evil. We refuse to compromise our sila as members of the Sangha. We do not accept anything that is being labeled as a donation, that is being stolen from the population of those who embody the vision of freedom and democracy. That is the most simple gesture of non-collusion with Ma Sac. Allow me to reiterate a few points before I end today. There is a genocide going on in Burma. It's a genocide of democracy. Ming Online, the terrorist at large, and his terrorist organization, SAC, known by the acronym MASAC, he has been taken over by the most toxic expression that we have seen in recent history of delusion and moha, infused with extreme lobha, greed, and deep rage, dosa. He has ordered, through threat of violence and persecution, members of the Dhamma, now gone rogue as members of the terrorist group MASAC. He has instigated now for nearly 5 months, and it's escalating. It's gone from systematic persecution to arbitrary murder and arrest and torture to full-scale genocide of anyone involved in overt or subtle expressions of support for the civil disobedience movement known as Burma's second great independence movement, a revolution of human consciousness, non-violently being oppressed by the terrorist group MASAC. It's a genocide on these people. The Sangha in Burma, primarily the 500,000 monks and the top 500 leading Mahanayaka Seros, leading elder monks, along with the Tilashins, I will close here, the nuns, the top 1,000. You have an example with U Withara, who fasted and was tortured by the white supremacist occupiers at the prison, tortured because he refused to take food from his torturers. He acted in conscience, similarly to the monks in Vietnam that burned themselves, and immolated themselves, similarly to the monks and nuns in Tibet that lit themselves on fire in deep, disobedient protest to the occupiers from China. Burma has a long history of revolutionary Dhamma sedition, refusing to collude with those who steal and kill and commit ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, and genocide at this point of democracy. The Sangha has a moral obligation not to take food, medicines, money, shelter that has been stolen and committed through acts of violence and genocide today from the people that normally support the Sangha. It's the conscious revolutionary action of restraint. Put up signs on every monastery throughout the country before there are no more nuns and monks left in that country. The genocide could very well be what happened in Cambodia under Pol Pot. It is now in the earlier stages. First they came and got the Karens, and then the Shans, and then the Rohingya, the Buddhist, and now they're going to come and get the nuns and the Buddhist monks. everywhere you could imagine, Ma Sac will annihilate the population in the name of his unconscious evil. This is the time to enact the Uvisara, the Uottama, in each nun and monk throughout the country. Fast from complicity with evil. Otherwise, it is cowardice, a deeper form of collusion with evil, radical cowardice. Young monks, young nuns, you know you hear the truth of what I'm sharing. Participate in freedom, confront the genocide through Dhamma sedition, through restraint from taking money, food, shelter, anything whatsoever, stolen from the people. Those are stolen goods. It is wrong to associate with theft, evil, and murder. Equally, and I'll close here, Uvisara was willing to die, and he died 166 days into his hunger strike. Refused to be shamed and humiliated by the white supremacist occupier, torturers. Refused to be shamed by Ma Sac. Refused to participate in the evil of Ma Sac. Confront the injustice of Ma Sac. The last point, Dhamma-oriented sedition, revolutionary Dhamma sedition, political sanvega, the heightened urgency of infusing your Dhamma with politics is inseparable, and create Dhamma sedition in your actions and in your speech. I would only encourage anyone in the country who is willing to translate this into Burmese and any other respective dialect in Burma. If you listen to this, write a speech that's rooted in Dhamma sedition. As Martin Luther King said, in paraphrasing something that I assumed is accurate, when he talked about the importance of Dhamma outrage, he called it sacred rage. The political sanvega, sacred rage, definitely the house is on fire in Burma. Rise up in the fire. He said, for every church that you burn, we'll build another 100 so you can burn them. Imagine somewhere in Myanmar today, there's an Ottama, there's a Uvisara, there's you in your own heart. For every monastery that you burn, we have 100 more that we'll build. You need to rise up, Sangha, in your revolutionary obligation to Dhamma, to the people, to freedom, and overcome inertia, the normalization of violence and evil, and occupy the Uottama, the Uvisara in you. Where is your Dhamma sedition? Write speeches and broadcast them across the country, and let Ming Online and all of the men and women in the military, in the terrorist group, in the police force, hear you loudly. We see you, Ma Sac. We are willing to fill the prisons full in protest to your evil occupation of the population and your genocide of democracy. End of story. It's an issue of conscience and Dhamma in action. Burma, we have seen the heroism of children and teenagers, young adults, middle-aged, and the elderly rising up over the last 5 months. Thousands being incarcerated, over 1,000 murdered, tens of thousands injured, tens of thousands more running in safe houses, hiding in forests and jungles. Monks and nuns in Burma, where are you? Senior Sayadaws, senior Tilashins, where are you? refuse to participate in Ma Sak's occupation of genocide of democracy. Rise up in your fiery speeches and include Dhamma Sedition as the new sutta of today. What will you say to keep high the radiance of compassion, of loving kindness, of wisdom in radical, revolutionary, liberating action? Create acts of Dhamma Sedition. And if it requires going to prison, go to prison. If it requires whatever it requires to support the end of genocide of democracy, to free Aung San Suu Kyi, don't be looking beyond her as a third option. Don't be looking beyond anything. The country is on fire with the genocide of democracy right now, and it's in the hands of the nuns and the monks to rise up in fiery Dhamma Sedition. As Martin Luther King said, for every black woman and man you kill or you bash with your baton, we have another 100 black women and men ready to have their heads bashed and shot to confront the injustice of the white man and the white woman's ignorance. We have examples in Burma with U Withara and U Otama. I'd like to encourage, find their speeches, circulate them on social media throughout the country, take their photographs, take their life stories, take those speeches. They're the ones who incited sedition, Dhamma Sedition, against the white supremacist, colonialist, genocidal occupiers, and right now the country is occupied by totalitarian men and women, dictators, hell-bent on money, privilege, and profit, just like the white British were. And it's wrong, and it must stop, and the genocide of democracy must end. And I beg, I implore the monks and nuns in Burma, even younger monks, break ranks with the elders, break ranks with the dogma. You have noble examples with General Aung San, Aung San Suu Kyi, U Withara, U Otama, U Gambira, the Saffron Revolution. Monks and nuns in Burma, rise up in fiery Dhamma Sedition and do whatever is required to support the population that supports you. Restrain from taking medicines, food, shelter, medicine from anyone involved in the terrorist group Ma Sak, and use the power of your Dhamma sermons to create Dhamma Sedition, to support democracy and freedom and the preservation of Dhamma in Myanmar. It's in your conscience to act, and I implore you to act on behalf of your commitment to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, to the people, to end the genocide in democracy. May it be so. From my heart to yours, thank you for participating in this talk. Hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.